When you come to Australia, you hear all about the wildlife. Be careful of snakes in the bush. Don't go near the water for fear of crocs. Watch out for vampires on your late night walk. Wait, what? Yep, that's right. The Yarama is what's known as the Aussie vampire. With deep roots in Indigenous Australian folklore, these creatures are actually what inspired the more well-known tales of drop bears. Picture this. You're out camping in the Aussie outback. After a long day of hiking and exploring, you're tuckered out, so you set up your swag underneath a shady fig tree and lay down to get some sleep. Whatever hopes you had for a restful night are rudely interrupted by the heavy thud of something dropping down on top of you from the tree branch above, and the sting of sharp teeth sinking into your flesh. The Yarama is literally drinking you alive. Unlike normal vampires, however, they are not so considerate as to just stop there. After he has had his fill of your blood, the Yarama will begin to eat you, starting from the feet and slowly moving upwards. You'll feel every bit of this, but you will not scream, and you will have no chance to escape, as the Yarama has paralyzed you upon first biting into your skin. When you have been completely consumed, the Yarama will then take a nap beneath the fig tree. Upon waking from his slumber, he will belch your remains up, spewing you into the dirt beneath the tree. It is there, over the next few hours, that you will slowly, and quite painfully, become a Yarama yourself. You are now free to return to your travels, wandering the Australian outback for all eternity.
My family and I had a caravan in a holiday park in New South Wales, Australia. We would go there every school holidays, and there was many kids I used to run around and play with. I have fond memories of this place, where I learned to ride a bike, had my first kiss, but other memories are not as good, and now leave me with that egg flip feeling in my stomach. The people that owned that caravan park had a son. He was roughly 25 years old, and I would have been around 5 or 6. He would drive around the park and collect everyone's rubbish on a tractor and do other odd jobs like this to help out his parents. Every once in a while, he would pull up when I was playing out the front and asked if I wanted to ride on the tractor. I, being young and naive, of course accepted and jumped on, because what child doesn't want to ride on a tractor? This was back in the days where parents would let their children play in the streets without much supervision, and you just came back home when the streetlights came on. One day, when he dropped me back to our van, my dad came storming out, grabbed me by the arm, and yanked me off the tractor without saying a word to the man. He took me inside and told me to never, ever hang out with him again. "I don't want you hanging around with that man," he said, without even saying why. "But he's nice. He gives me lollies," I said. "Just don't. I'm telling you, don't talk to him." I couldn't understand why my dad didn't want me talking to the nice man who only gave me tractor rides, gave me lollies and hugs, and sometimes the odd sandwich. Fast forward to nearly 13, maybe 14 years later, my family and I are watching the news, when the man's face flashes across the screen, attached to a story where he had killed 2 people and is now serving time in prison. Look at this, my dad said. I knew he was bad news. There was always just something about him. Do you remember when he used to take you around on the tractor? My blood ran cold and my stomach dropped. The most disturbing part? He killed people with pills he would call his lollies. Please, always listen to your parents. I would have been dead by now if it wasn't for them.
Cairns, North Queensland. Known far and wide for beautiful, lush, tropical rainforest, pristine beaches, and a laid-back hippie lifestyle. Sounds like paradise, right? Well, not all of it. A little ways south of the bustling tropical haven is a place called Babinda Boulders, better known Australia-wide as the Devil's Pool. The story follows a young, beautiful woman named Ulana, who married an elder from her own Yidinji tribe. Soon after their marriage, however, she met and fell in love with another man named Daiga from a wandering tribe. The two had run away together, but were soon discovered camping near the Devil's Pool. Whilst Daiga was captured by the elders, Ulana, rather than return to a loveless marriage, threw herself into the raging waters, calling for Daiga to follow her. She hit the water crying out for her love, which shook the water into action. The land vibrated around her, sending boulders flying into the creek, causing the water to plunge forward at an alarming rate. If you're venturing near this spot, the first thing that might send a shiver down your spine is an ominous signed warning that reads, "This creek has claimed many lives." The sign tells of the many dangers within the creek, such as the extremely slippery rocks and rapidly rising water levels. The second thing that may cause you a chill is the faint sound of a woman calling out to you, beckoning you to enter the waters, regardless of the warnings. Not so bad, right? You can ignore them, right? But can you? Here's a chilling thought. The signs all around the creek very clearly tell of the extreme dangers these waters pose. And yet, many lives have been claimed. Who, in their right mind, would go anywhere near this creek? Unless it was entirely out of their control.
The Indigenous people of Australia have up to 75 different dialects, depending on the region where they come from. So the name of this being could be called something entirely different in the other dialects. But my local tribe called it the Kardacha man. Growing up in an outback town, you get a lot of freedom you take for granted. But that freedom could also get you into trouble, big trouble. This occurred when I was about 11 years old. My Aboriginal friend and I were walking around town, bored out of our brains during school holidays. The rest of our friends had gone away for the holidays. So we decided to go fishing in our secret spot down by the old Aboriginal encampment, where they moved after the occupation of their land in our area, which was about 15 kilometres out of town. We headed around to the butchery to pick up some meat for yabbies, to his house for rods and traps, and then my house for food, drinks and a shovel. We planned to dig for our worms out by the river. We got all the necessary supplies and headed out along the side of the highway. We were walking and talking and just stuffing around when we finally got there. We headed down the sand road and came across a fence that blocked off the sacred land. There was a statue of some sort on the boundary, and my mate stopped and said a few words. He always said that his dad told him to do it, otherwise the bad spirits could see us. I told him that it was silly and skipped it. We go down the back of the camp and walk on another kilometre or so and find our spot. And there was a nice breeze blowing through all the old ghost gums. We could see the fish jumping and knew we were in for a good day. We started to dig around for worms and come up with a few big good ones and get to fishing. The day gets on and it turns out that we are terrible fishermen with rods, so we abandon them and get in the water to catch them with our hands. Turns out I'm also terrible at that. but my mate ends up catching a decent-sized yellow belly. So we keep it for eating and showing off, obviously. We hadn't kept an eye on the time, and before we knew it, the sun had set. My friend starts getting really nervous, saying that it's time to get out of here and that we really need to leave. I asked him why, and he says that it's really unsafe to be out there after dark. I laugh, and at that exact moment, there was a huge splash in the water behind us. We both shit a little, but with our child bravery, we check it out and couldn't say a thing, just ripples on top of the water. We dismiss it as a big fish and start to pack up our stuff to leave. By the time we start our march back, it's pitch black, and we can barely see our hands in front of us, and forgot to pack a torch, so we kind of fumble our way through the bush until our eyes adjusted. We were walking for about 20 minutes when we stop. We can hear heavy footsteps off to our left, about 15 metres away. We strain our hearing and the footsteps stop. We then realise that the bush is silent. No wind, nothing. Our eyes have adjusted to the dark, so we can kind of see where we're going, and we realise we've overshot the road by about half a kilometre, and whatever was making the footsteps was between us and the road. So we decide to push on and come out along the highway further up the road. That was a mistake. The footsteps keep persisting, sometimes closer and sometimes further away. I swear at times I could hear low mumbling. I kept saying to my friend, but he told me to shut up and don't look back. It can't see us, was what he kept saying. So I push on, my feeling getting more and more uneasy. The second we hear a loud crash come from our left on a small animal trail, we were on, and my mate grabs me and pulls me off into the scrub and tells me to lay down. As we're laying there, we see a silhouette loom up to the path. It kind of has an outline of feathers on it and is extremely tall and humanoid, but sickly thin. It is going from tree to tree, not very far from us, and is looking all around, snapping its head and making a low mumbling sound as it moves. It was looking for us. It keeps moving around where we were and suddenly stops, looking back down the path, and we hear what could have been a kangaroo jump off into the bush. The being let out an unearthly scream that hurt our ears and shoots off down the path faster than anything I've ever seen. I looked to my mate and whispered to him if he had just seen what I had. But when I looked, he'd had his head in his hands the whole time. He answered, "We're not allowed to look." His cheeks were all tear-stained. He whispered, "I told you he would see you." We waited what felt like 2 hours and then bailed out of the bushes and ran the remaining distance to town, losing our fish along the way and some of our stuff. We finally made it, and every time I tried to bring it up with him, he told me to shut my mouth or it would come back. So I eventually stopped trying. I haven't been able to sleep right since. I'm an Indigenous Australian, 36-year-old female, First Nations. Due to colonisation, I'm obviously not what one would consider a full blood, but nevertheless, I identify as Indigenous. I grew up hearing stories about yowies and hairy men. Yowies are small meerkat-type creatures, and hairy men are what would be considered a Sasquatch-type creature. In my youth, maybe around 16 years old, my cousins, who were also similar ages, and myself would go spend holidays with family in a town with a large population of Indigenous people. I'm not gonna lie, we were here for the boys. This one particular summer night, we had decided to walk into town. Where our family lived was maybe 2 to 3 kilometres out of town, but the road was a highway which was lit all the way and had a cemented path all the way from town which ran alongside a cleared field. The grass wasn't mowed, but it wasn't what you would say was overgrown, just at that in-between stage of being mowed a few weeks back. So we started our trek home at about midnight this night. There were 4 of us girls, 2 in front and 2 in back. We got about 100 metres out of town when myself and my cousin looked up I noticed what looked like a large man with a long black coat and hat walking towards us. He was about 150 metres ahead. Now, the path, like I said, was a straight shot with streetlights the whole way along. We hadn't been drinking or smoking anything. We paused and were like, shit, who's that? And stood there, debating whether or not to continue. The whole time, I didn't take my eyes off this person. As my cousins glanced back and forth during the debate, we all stopped talking. Once we noticed that this man had all of a sudden turned into a type of haze or fog. Picture it like someone blurring out a person in a photograph, like it was out of focus, but everything around was clear as day. All of a sudden, this man was now a little creature. It was hard to estimate size, but I'm thinking similar to a meerkat or a large rabbit up on its hind legs. It was looking straight in our direction. Then after about 5 to 10 seconds, it hazed over again and completely disappeared. We all saw it, and we still talk about it to this day. I'm pretty confident that it was a yowie or a little hairy man. There's different theories in the Indigenous community about them. Some believe that they live under riverbeds. Some think they live inside cattle. There's also people who say they lure little kids away into the bush.
South Australia and Victoria. Truly beautiful destinations and an absolute must-see on any Australian holiday. Just be careful when cruising the Murray River. Indigenous folklore tales. They tell of a mysterious creature that dwells beneath the murky waters. It is called the Muljawak, and he does not appreciate visitors. If you find yourself sailing, cruising, or, God forbid, swimming down the Murray River, and you happen to catch sight of an unusually large clump of seaweed, get out. Get out now. Turn the boat around. Swim to the shore. Just get out. This is not a natural occurrence. A Muljawak has gathered this seaweed to hide underneath it. He will wait for his victim to get just close enough to grab them. He will not move too far from here. He doesn't want to make his presence known. So if you just slowly move away from there, you might be okay. Need more convincing? Well, what if I told you an actual documented attack exists? Tales from the history books tell of an account from early European settlers. On their journey up the Murray, on a steamboat eastbound, the ship's captain tells of witnessing two giant hands grasping onto the hull of the boat. The captain immediately grabbed for his rifle. Aboriginal elders on board with him pleaded with him not to shoot, but their cries fell on deaf ears as he fired upon the beast. The elders warned that the captain would suffer as a result of his actions. Soon after, the captain broke out in weeping, red blisters all over his body. He took 6 months to die.
Just down the road from where a few years ago I had previously lived in southeast Australia is the opening into 100 acres of woodlands and bush that I frequently went into when I was younger. Do the usual things, riding and camping, etc. I was driving out around 11:30 p.m. with my girlfriend, and as we were in the area, decided to show her the woodlands while we were in the area, as she loves everything to do with nature. And it was summer, so it was an extremely warm night. I left my car with the lights shining into the trees, as we weren't going too far in, and it was pitch black. And the two of us just kind of started chatting, having a smoke and generally relaxing. She was sitting on a sort of map of the area that had been put in some plastic, and while I was keeping an eye on the trees, I had a feeling that something was just wrong. I've heard a few people say that they have said that they felt that they were in danger, although nothing around them was off, and it was this same feeling. Every sense was almost reaching out and my adrenaline was up, but there wasn't really anything in my eye line that seemed any different. After lighting another cigarette to calm my nerves, I scanned the tree line again and realised that it looked different to before. It was only after staring into the dark that I saw that there was moonlight now lighting up the grass where it couldn't before, as there was a black shape blocking that before, whereas I thought it was a tree. The only way to describe was that all sound just ceased and everything went dead silent, and a few seconds later, this disgusting feeling of dread fell over me, and I saw motion in the dark of the path as this thing crawled towards us on all fours. I've seen nearly every animal in the outback here, and we don't have any large predators like in the US or Europe, but somehow I knew this thing was a predator, and it wasn't hiding itself from us, but just slowly crawling forward towards us. I don't know if my girlfriend saw it or not, but I couldn't look away. Just where it reached the line where my car lights were able to illuminate, it reared up onto two legs and just sat staring at us. I'm 6'4", and this thing was about another metre larger than me, with arms that were too long that reached down near the ground, and all I could make out was off-white, almost yellowish fur on it. And in the dim light, could make out a silhouette of its head, and it looked like a dog or a wolf. I wasn't able to move as it stared at me, but it was at this point my girlfriend gasped, which seemed to break off whatever was stopping me from thinking logically. I grabbed her by the arm and sprinted to my car, slammed the doors and tore out of there as fast as I could, both of us too scared to speak until about half an hour later. We've both discussed it many times, and the feeling that we had was what I can imagine a rabbit sees when it catches a wolf or a fox looking at it, that this is something that would be able to end us with absolute ease, if it so chose. Neither of us have been able to come up with any explanation for what it was, but it has definitely changed the way I view the woods and the bush. And when I go camping or hiking now, I think back to that and wonder what it was, and if I will ever see anything like it again. I'd like to mention a few key points before I share some of the things that happened to me. I'm not looking for fame nor attention, and everything contained within is 100% factual. I'm an Australian. These occurrences happened on the central coast of New South Wales. Now, I'm an avid outdoorsman with a keen interest and in-depth knowledge of Australian native fauna. Each of these occurrences have a witness, apart from myself. I don't claim these events are paranormal, yet I am to this day still without a reasonable explanation. I live on the New South Wales Central Coast, in an area that has houses in close proximity to Brisbane Water National Park, literally within metres from some back fences. Myself and my partner hold a keen interest which sees us venture into bushland regularly. For argument's sake, let's say we are avid birdwatchers. A few weeks ago, the local fire service commenced backburning in parts of the Brisbane Water National Park over 2 or so days, which was obviously for hazard reduction. Most of the fire was directed at burning off leaf litter and dry debris, which covers the ground in an effort to reduce the chances of spot fires, which have in the past become large fires and threaten houses and cause neighbouring suburbs to be evacuated. Because of the way the backburning was controlled, it completely burned off the debris, and basically 90% of flora that was over 2 or so feet seemed to have survived, except some charring, of course. Even some grass plants survived, while others were completely burned, including their underground roots, which left large round circles in the substrate. This meant the canopy was fully intact. That is an important point in my story. The fire was controlled so well, the left-hand side was completely obliterated by fire, while the right side was untouched. Now the path is about 3 to 4 feet wide, at its widest points. Anyway, after about 48 hours after the fire service had finished backburning, my partner and myself ventured into a large patch of Brisbane Water National Park, along a track we have walked no less than 200 times in the last 10 years. The first thing we noticed, of course, was the lack of small shrubs, and ground cover, which had been replaced by a 3 to 4 centimetre layer of ash. It was also hard not to notice the smell and non-visible smokiness, which irritated our throats and noses. But by far, the most profound thing we noticed was just how quiet it was. Usually, we hear birds chirping and snakes slithering into the underbrush, lizards scampering out of the way, and ducks splashing around in the creek that runs along the whole length of the walking track to the right. Across the creek, there are literally kilometres of bush in all directions, so it was a little odd that it was so desolate, even after backburning. We decided to press on, even though we were pretty sure that we weren't going to see any wildlife. We continued along the track for about another 20 minutes, all the while chatting about nothing in particular, when all of a sudden, we see 2 vertical lines which stand at about 6 feet tall and 4 centimetres or so in circumference, come towards us like they've been shook, held back, and released towards us, almost like a slingshot. We immediately run over to the trees, about 4 metres or so off the track, because we thought it may have been caused by wildlife. My first instinct was to look up, as it may have been a large bird fleeing, but there were no birds at all in any of the trees, and we would have seen or heard the wing flapping and it breaking through the canopy. It wasn't any type of goanna, as we only have 2 types which occur naturally here, and both are arboreal and will take to the nearest tree when threatened. We checked every tree, every hollow log, and any type of ground cover which survived the fire, and found nothing. It definitely would have been spotted when we checked the trees and surrounding ground cover. It also wasn't any type of snake, as the only arboreal snake we have locally is the diamond python, which I could spot from a mile away. We continued walking for another 3 kilometres down the track, and the whole time felt like we were being watched, and I was quite uneasy. That feeling completely left as soon as we turned around and backtracked and headed towards home. I believe this is the first time I've shared these. My partner and myself went out on another adventure, but this time we were looking for nocturnal animals to photograph. We went to a waterfall which was only about 15 minutes from our house, but it's rather secluded and completely dead at night. Funnily enough, it becomes packed on the weekends during the day in the warmer months. The layout of the waterfall is basically a large parking lot at the stop of the waterfall, which has a small park with barbecues, tables, and a small block of toilets. From the parking lot, you can also access the very top of the waterfall, which is basically a rock escarpment with water running through it. You can also access stairs that take you down to both the middle of the waterfall, which is just a huge rock platform, and the very bottom of the waterfall. It takes about 20 minutes to walk from top to bottom. Anyway, we parked the car and I grabbed my gear, which included my camera. We start making our way towards the top of the falls, which has a 2-foot barrier you have to step over to access the rock escarpment. Right as I went to put my leg over the fence, I heard the most disturbing noise I have ever heard. It sounded like a human moaning in pain. But to describe it the best I can, imagine 10 different people with 10 different voice qualities, all making the same moaning sound at the same time. I'm not one to frighten easily, but I have to admit, it sent chills up my spine. I told my partner to hurry up and get back to the car, and I locked the doors as soon as we got in and we left in a hurry. Now, this place is pitch dark. There are 0 lights, and there is no way in hell you'd be there without a torch. Not to mention you'd be able to tell anyone was even there by the cars parked in the parking lot, as this isn't a place you'd walk to. When I told a close friend of mine, who also frequents the waterfall to photograph wildlife, he told me he also had an experience the night before, which happened to be the night after I'd been there. He'd finished work late and thought he'd go for a quick walk around to see what he could find. This was in the Australian spring, when everything is out and about due to the warm and humid weather. He said he'd parked his car and got about halfway down the stairs to the bottom of the falls when he came across a snake. He was photographing it when he heard the door of the toilet block being slammed repeatedly. He started running up the stairs to get back to his car, and he said as he was running up, it sounded like something was going mental, slamming things within the toilet block. He got in his car and left. My friend and I, we decided to go check out the waterfall that night to see if we could find anything. We parked the car and went straight to the toilet block. We checked the block that he had heard the commotion in and found a reasonable amount of blood inside the basin and a small pool in the basin's soap dish. We contemplated calling the police, but weren't exactly sure what we would say. We left soon after, and neither of us visited that place for over a month afterwards. Since then, we've been back to this place multiple times without incident. Now, on to the last night. We headed out along a road on the Central Coast, which by day is rather busy due to the high number of residences and farms that are along this road. By night, it's usually very quiet with a few cars using it sporadically, so I have my high beams on 95% of the time. We drove along this road for about 40 minutes in search of marsupials to photograph. This road intersects large masses of bush on both sides. I'd also like to add at this point that this road is not straight or level by any means. There are a mixture of turns as well as slight to aggressive inclines and declines along basically the entirety of this road. After driving for 40 minutes without any luck, we decided to head back along the same route we took. We were driving for about 10 to 15 minutes on our way back when we hit one of the very slight, gradual inclines along the road. When we were about halfway up the incline, I noticed something in the distance, maybe 200 to 250 meters or so, which I initially thought was a shadow being cast from residual lighting of my high beams, when all of a sudden, it moved from the middle of the road to the right side. And while the figure was still in motion, I asked the passenger and the person who'd been present for the 3 unexplained experiences, "Can you see that?" To which they replied, "Yes. What is it?" We got to the top of the incline and onto level ground once again and stopped in the location we saw it. Pulling out one of my torches, surveying where we'd seen it, to my surprise, where I had crossed to was a small property, which was essentially a house with a very small paddock with horses out the front. But what caught my attention was the horses were not startled in the slightest and could actually see one of them close to the fence eating. After about 2 minutes of surveying the area, I continued along the road and asked my partner exactly what they had seen. They relayed exactly what I had seen, which was a tall, maybe 6 foot, but with about a 2.5 foot wide profile, but rounded. It was very hard to gauge an exact height, because since we were on an incline, for instance, say a person was to walk in that exact spot, we would only be able to see from the knees up, due to the blind spot on the summit. My passenger added another piece of information, which was that it was rusty coloured. I didn't see any colour, but have to admit that I was paying as much attention to the road as I was to the figure, and as I was travelling at approximately 70 k's per hour, I really had to keep my attention on the road while trying to get to the summit as quick as possible to see what it was. I'd just like to add another detail, which I find is rather strange. While I couldn't see the figure's complete leg area, it didn't seem to be walking in a normal fashion. It was almost like it was gliding. I know that seems odd, but if I had to liken the body shape to a known animal, it would definitely, without a doubt, be an orangutan, but standing a fair bit taller and not as hunched in the lower back area. So there you have it. I no longer live in that area. I now live 40 minutes north of there, but I still visit often due to family. I'd like to point out that all of the above happened within about a 6-week period, which all seemed to start with hazard reduction backburning. Aussie summers are harsh. I've not had any weird happenings since then. I still spend a ridiculous amount of my time out in the bush. I will not give away my profession, but I will say I'm in a scientific field that works with wildlife, a scientific field which claims animals, such as the above, are not endemic to Australia. The last half of 2017 was pretty exhausting. The most draining part, both emotionally, physically, and financially, has been the laborious task of moving my father into an aged care facility due to his rapidly advancing dementia. He lives in Tasmania, where I grew up, and I'm currently working and living in Brisbane, which is about 2,500 kilometres, or 1,500 miles for you Imperials, to the north of Tasmania. I've been making the 3.5-hour flight down to Tasmania about twice a month to sort out my dad's situation. I've been busying myself by fixing up his empty, dilapidated home in order to get it ready to be sold. I moved out all of his furniture and belongings, save for a pile of blankets and pillows that I turn into a makeshift bed on the floor while I'm in visiting. The house is situated in a semi-rural area, surrounded by overgrown trees and bushes. It's an old house, it's damp, everything creaks, and there is currently no electricity, which makes the nighttime very creepy. The house itself is not very secure, no alarm system. The doors have locks, but a forceful nudge will pop the door open. I flew in on Christmas Eve in the late evening, picked up my hire car to make the hour-long drive down to the house. I stopped in at a mate's place who lives about 10 minutes from my dad's to have a few beers and shoot the shit about the year that just had passed. After a couple of hours, I realised that I had probably surpassed the legal blood alcohol limit to drive. My mate's legendary wife dropped me off at dad's and offered to come back in the morning to pick me up and go back to their place to get my car. I entered my dad's house around midnight. Inside the house was pitch black, and in my slightly drunk state, I flipped the light switch and nothing happened. Oh yeah, that's right, no power. Using my phone as a light to navigate my way through the house, over the creaky floorboards, I noticed that some of the tools I had left laying around inside the house had been stolen. I sighed and accepted the fact that it was my own stupid fault for leaving them out in an unsecure house. Some kids probably noticed that no one is living there and took advantage of the situation. It was unsettling knowing that someone had been in here. But I didn't bother calling the police over a hammer, wrench and screwdriver that came to a grand total of about $16.50. Good news was the big toolbox, which I keep locked up in the laundry cupboard that houses my more expensive power tools, was still there and intact. I studied the padlock and the space around it, and it looked pretty scratched up and dented, like someone had crudely attempted to prise it open. "Nice try, dickheads," I said aloud to myself. The toolbox is very big and heavy. Too big for one person to carry it, unless you're Andre the Giant. Exhausted, I went into one of the furnitureless bedrooms, made my makeshift bed out of my blankets and pillows. I couldn't get comfortable, and it was taking me a while to drift off to sleep. As I was laying there, the only sounds I could hear over the ringing of my tinnitus was the gentle rustle of wind through the trees. I could also hear what sounded like the unmistakable crunch of boots on the gravel driveway that went up the side of the house. I tried to listen harder. Then there was this loud gong sound of something solid coming into contact with the metal railing that leads up to the back door. This makes me sit up wide-eyed while my heart rate starts to increase. Maybe it was a wallaby or a possum. I sit there as still as possible, just listening. I can hear the sound of the trees in the wind and nothing else for a few moments, and I start to calm down. This is interrupted by the pop and squeak of the back door being pushed open. I freeze, not knowing what to do. I could hear footsteps creaking through the back of the house, and I hear the laundry cupboard being opened. I was up by the other end of the hallway, but I could hear whispering. The only words I could make out were, "There, shh, quick." I pull myself together, pull out my phone, and call the coppers. I chat to the dispatcher while burying my head under the pillow to muffle my voice. I explain the situation to the dispatcher, and she says the cops are coming and they're on their way. While this is happening, I can hear a chink sound of what I'm assuming was the lock of the toolbox trying to be broken. The dispatcher suggests that I lock the door of the room I'm in. I agree, and as I slowly pad over across the room to the door, one of the floorboards creaks so freaking loud. I freeze and hear dead silence from the laundry. They must have heard. After about 30 seconds of standing still, I try to take another step and get yet another high-pitched creak. But this seems to work in my favour because I hear my new house guests scatter away out the back door. I lock the bedroom door and tell the dispatcher that I think they've gone. She tells me to stay put until the police arrive, and I tell her I'm more than happy to comply. After about 5 minutes, the cops arrive and the dispatcher bids me farewell. The police did a search of the area and found nothing, as expected. They had tried to break open the toolbox. One of the coppers says, "Why didn't they just use bolt cutters? Fucking amateurs." I explained to the coppers about how when I had come home that some of the tools I'd left laying around were stolen and that the toolbox looked like it had already attempted to be broken into. Upon hearing that, the other cop stated his theory of how events took place. They probably broke in early the night before you got here. They grabbed what they could, tried to open the toolbox, but couldn't, and then left to go get something to open it with. While they were gone, you came home, and then they arrived back here to open the toolbox. I doubt they were dangerous, probably just kids. Good timing, I think to myself. I make a report, and that's that. I stayed up until sunrise and then decided to get a couple of hours sleep until my mate's wife came to pick me up and collect my car. I asked if I can keep my tools at their place for safekeeping, to which they agreed. I then drove to my dad's old folks' home and had Christmas lunch with him and his new elderly buddies. The following day, I went to the hardware store to purchase some newer, sturdier door locks. This is 100% true, and I am still scared to go out there. I went out pigging with one of my best mates all the time, but this one time, the dogs lose their shit and go to jump off the back. So we stop and let them loose, and they shoot off like they're on the trail of something beside a really tall dam bank. So, we think we're under some pigs. We were standing there and could hear their bells off in the distance, getting further away. Then, nothing. The bush was silent and we started to get a bit unnerved. We felt okay, because we were both holding loaded guns, but it was still an uneasy feeling. We stood listening for about 10 to 15 minutes and could hear not a thing. It was almost suffocating. So, my mate started calling his dogs in. He's calling for a good 15 minutes and we still hear nothing. So he says, fuck this. We're going looking for them. As he turned to the car, we hear the bells come from behind us in the tree line, which we thought was weird because it was the opposite direction to which the dogs had left. So we turn around listening and my mate starts calling out to them to come. And from behind us comes the dogs, without their bells. Needless to say, we both shit bricks and throw them on the car and bail to the other side of the place. The whole time, the bells were still jingling like something had them on. Weird thing was, we were a good 400 kilometres from the closest civilization, so we shit absolute bricks and were uneasy for the rest of the night. When I was young, I lived in a quiet, small town in Queensland. The whole town was surrounded by bush in every direction for hundreds of kilometres, and we had so much room to play. This particular story is about the first time we got drunk. In the winter, the level of water would drop significantly, enough for us to camp in the riverbed. My best mate's parents owned a pub at the time, so we were in charge of getting the drinks for a little camping trip we had planned so we could finally pop our drunk cherry. The place we had in mind was near an old indigenous settlement where a few creepy things have happened to us over time. So we made our way down into the riverbank, which was low on the side we came in and really high on the other side. You couldn't see on the other side through all of the trees on the top, and it was kind of unnerving knowing someone could be up there watching and you wouldn't know. There are about 7 of us kids in the camp and our parents have no idea where we are or what we're doing. We lied and said we were staying at a friend's place. We set up our camp and built a little shelter for all of us to sleep under. We are all set up and start drinking as the sun is setting. Soon it's dark and we're in full swing, mixing drinks and singing songs and throwing stuff in the water, and generally making a whole heap of noise. As we started to wind down, One of my friends says he saw something move on top of the riverbank on the steep side. We all say that he's full of shit and should calm down, but he's adamant there is someone up there. So we all start calling out, "Come out, you pussy!" amongst other things, being brave beyond our years. To our surprise, a bearded man wearing straggly clothes and no shoes comes out of the tree line, stands on the edge of the bank, and just stares at us. We all go silent, waiting for him to do something. But for about 5 minutes, he just stands there, and then he retreats back into the tree line. We all talk amongst ourselves and get a bit nervous, but we soon forget it. About an hour, this guy comes back. But he isn't on the bank anymore. He's coming out of the shadows from the other side of the bank and entering our camp. He comes over and stands next to the fire, just joins our group of 12-year-old kids and stands there. We are all officially a bit scared and don't really know what to do. So we just sit there in silence. Eventually, one of my mates gets up the courage to speak to him. "G'day mate, how are ya? Are you okay?" The guy just stares at my friend and then starts staring at each one of us, just for a little bit, spending time on each one of us. My friend tries again. "Hey, are you okay? What's your name?" The man snaps his head back at my friend and stares at him wide-eyed for at least 2 minutes before answering. Without blinking, he says in a raspy whisper, "That's none of your fucking business." And he hisses like a cat. Then this guy jumps back screaming and staring at the fire like it just appeared and runs off up the steep bank in record time. It was impossible to get up this thing, so we all stand there speechless. We decide that it's best if we just stoke up the fire because it's about 39 kilometres walk in the pitch black back to town. And we weren't confident on that, so stoke the fire we did. We sat up for as long as we could, keeping watch, not really talking. We all eventually dozed off one by one, and when we woke up in the morning, everything was gone. All of our alcohol, all of our bags, all of our shoes, and all of our blankets, everything. The creepy thing was that none of us awoke as someone robbed us blind, and there was not a single footprint. We were sleeping in wettish sand too, so there should have been footprints everywhere, but there were none. It looked like we hadn't even been there. Needless to say, we bailed and ran most of our way back to town. Our feet were all cut up and messy by the time we got back. We never told our parents about our camping trip, and I think we never will. So this happened around 5 or 6 years ago. I live in Perth, Western Australia. Me and my best friend lived in the same suburb at the time. We were underage, so when it came to weekends, we usually just went exploring around parks and in the quarry in our neighbourhood. It was late at night, and we were still just wandering the streets near our houses, doing whatever we were doing. We dared ourselves to go into the quarry at night, which is pitch black and surrounded by bushland. It's a decent-sized area, bigger than a football field. We chickened out at the entrance, and I decided to sit on a rock just outside the quarry while we were chatting. So just to give you an idea of my position, my back was facing the bushes, and the quarry and I were facing towards my friend. Her face suddenly went blank mid-conversation, and she just froze up for a few seconds before sprinting off and yelling at me to run after her. I had no idea what was going on, but I ended up booking it. Honestly, I thought it was some sort of human threat, like a dodgy person. We ran like 2 streets down before she managed to stop, and I could get her to talk for a few minutes. She was absolutely terrified. She told me that when she was talking to me, a face appeared just to the left of my shoulder, probably around 1 meter back and coming from the bushes. She couldn't really see if there was a body, but she just described the face. She said it was evil and had this menacing presence that she couldn't describe. I can't get her to accurately describe what she saw, but she said that it was like the features weren't defined. She said that the eyes were blackened out, and she remembers it having a terrifying grin on its face. I've been a long-time lurker on Reddit, especially this forum, and I finally decided to post this life-changing and defining experience that I had when I was about 9 or 10 years old. So, when I say life-changing and defining, I truly do mean that. Ever since I had this experience, I have had an obsession with the other world, and I know in my heart that there is a lot more to this earth than what we can see with our eyes. I had a lot of really strange experiences at this property, but what I'm writing about was the beginning of a weird few years. Backtrack about 13 years ago, and I'm 9 or 10 years old. My parents and I had just moved up to a mountain in the Gold Coast hinterland, Tamborine Mountain, which is in Australia. Absolutely beautiful place, full of national parks and tropical rainforests. To explain the layout of our old property, there was the main house, and about 100 metres to the left of the main house was a large shed. Separating the main house from the shed was a garden area with a little path leading from the shed to the house. It was just after dark, 7 p.m. My mum was inside the main house making dinner, and for some reason, I was with my dad at the shed while he was unloading things from the back of the truck with one of his mates. I helped for a little bit, but when it came to the bigger objects, I was just sitting around, admiring our new beautiful property. I can still remember this like it happened yesterday. So I'm sitting down and waiting for my dad to finish up so we can go back to the main house. And for some reason, and to this day, I still do not know why, I had this intense urge to look over to my right into the bushes, which separated the main house from the shed. At first, I couldn't really tell what it was, but the longer I stared at it, the more I realised it was not a trick of the light or my imagination. About 30 feet away from me was a small thing walking parallel to where I was sitting, wading through the bushes. It was walking at a normal pace, but pushing the bushes back to make way for itself. I could only see the side profile of this thing, but I could see that over its body, it was wearing something black, almost like a black cloak. From the side profile of its face, I could make out a pointed nose with sharp cheekbones and a large hole where I'm assuming its eye was. It was probably about 3 or 4 feet high and had the stature of a small child. I saw it for probably about 5 seconds. I think that was probably the first time in my life I had an adrenaline rush. My heart dropped to my stomach and I felt sick and confused. I couldn't speak or move. All I could feel was utter fear and terror. I stood up and quickly bolted inside to the shed and waited for my dad to finish up, because no way in hell was I going to walk back to the house by myself. It never looked at me. For all I know, it could have been before, but when I saw it, it didn't look at me or acknowledge me. I didn't sleep in my own bed until I was 13 after that experience. I was utterly scared of the dark, and still to this day, I don't like going outside after dark by myself. The older I got, the more I began to research paranormal topics. I tried for so long to convince myself that this was just a hallucination, but I know in my heart it wasn't. The best description that I could give, it would be, it looked like an alien grey. But the thing is, it still had proportionate features, if that makes any sense. I know this sounds insane, but it had the features of a goblin, pointed ears, and a sharp cheekbone. It was definitely wearing something black over the top of its shoulders, as I did not see legs. The most screwed up aspect of this experience for me is that to this day, I still have weird nightmares about that property. I've never forgotten that night, or how it has moulded and changed my perception of this world. There is so much more out there that we don't know about. Has anyone else ever had an experience similar to this? Okay, so this is my story. I was 15, I was at my boyfriend's house, and it was about 10:30 p.m. We were sitting on his trampoline in his backyard, which faces a small park behind his house. His yard is on a ground level about 1 metre, 3-ish feet above the ground level the park is on, and his fence is on that lower level. So, by sitting on the trampoline, we could see out into the darkness of the park, which was just slightly illuminated by his yard lights. We're talking when suddenly I feel an eerie chill, like we're being watched, like something wants us to know we're being watched. I remember glancing all over the place and jumping at the smallest sounds of the night. my boyfriend laughing at me, all before he suddenly stilled and rose up onto his knees to look at something in the park.
There's a man watching us from that tree.
Those words still chill me to the core. I froze and asked him to tell me what he was doing. He told me that the man was very tall, almost halfway up the tree, which was a large eucalyptus tree, and that only his head and shoulder were really visible, and that his eyes were glowing or reflecting the light from his yard lights. I wondered if he was lying and making fun of me again for being paranoid earlier, so I sat up and leaned over him to see the thing next to the tree. There it was. It was tall, darker than the shadows of the trees, and it wasn't lit up like the trees were from the lights. Its eyes were shining brightly, and it was exceptionally tall. It couldn't have been a man, if not for the shoulder and arm draped over the tree, and so it was not an animal either. I fell back onto the trampoline, and my boyfriend told me to be quiet and to start moving back towards the house. It was moving towards us. I shook my head. I did not want to move. I couldn't bring myself to move. I was frozen in fear. I don't know, but I remember he had to force me up, swearing loudly and telling me it was nearly at the fence. I got up and caught a glance of a figure nearly across the short distance from the trees to his yard and booked it to the stairs up to his front door. I glanced back to look again. My boyfriend yelled not to, that it was climbing over the fence. I somehow moved even faster and made it to the door without tripping up the stairs and breaking a leg. He told me again it had been trying to climb over the fence when I slowed down to take a look. His father swears it was a demon trying to test their faith or something, but I don't think it was. I had another encounter, maybe a month later. My boyfriend told me a figure was watching me from exposed ceiling beams of my old barn-like house during a FaceTime call late at night. Maybe a shadow man, maybe an Australian version of a skinwalker. I'm 19 now and I still can't stop thinking about what happened. If anyone knows what this sort of aggressive stalker behaviour means and what this creature was, please let me know. It was definitely not just some creepy man. This shadowy thing was at least 3 meters tall and had bright glowing white eyes.